So I've begun a series of videos to talk about how to install your own generation system and use it at home. And there's going to be a series of videos where it breaks it up. And that's mostly because I've done a lot of stuff on various kinds of generation, how to explore generation and generation possibilities, various kinds of storage systems and how to build those storage systems, but next to nothing on those two bits, that is how to link them together and then how to actually use them. So I've begun a series of videos. Now, I made an assumption on there. I assumed that people were already doing that. And of course, there's always a dangerous thing about assumption. It just makes an ass out of you, basically. So I was made aware of this by a number of comments from people who basically boiled it down to, is it worth it? They were looking at things like cost and things like the cost of energy generated, how it compared to mainline energy, that sort of stuff. So it took me a couple of steps back, really, because the initial question you need to ask yourself is it worth it? The next question you need to ask yourself are, what are the options? And then we need to look at the options and how to install those options. So I realised that I was in fact skipping ahead of the story, and what I ought to do really was start at the beginning and begin with the is it worth it? So that's the question that we're going to try to answer, or at least tackle, in this video. Now, I warn you, the video is a bit soapboxy because I have a whole set of beliefs that go behind is it worth it, so it may not be your thing. If it's not your thing, then just leave a thumbs down if it really irritates you and move on. If you're ambivalent about it, then don't bother watching the video. But if it is your thing, then that's what we're going to approach here. Now, a lot of people may not know that I do more than what's on this channel. This is not my main focus in life. The channel is just done really because I'm keen to promote these ideas. I'm very keen on science and I'm very keen on education. But I do a lot of other things, including consultancy work. And I was a member of the British government team that went to Japan post-Fukushima to look at their energy generation system. And we were looking at what we could do about that. Now, the big move to energy generation is not in centralisation. It's in micro-generation and distributed grids. So the idea of distributing energy generation across a whole country, as opposed to putting it in points and distributing the power, is that you get a robust system. It's like any network. If you have multiple nodes of power generation spread out in a web, and one part goes down, it means that the rest of it can actually feed the part that's gone down. If you have the other way around and you have centralised generation and your generator blows up like it did in Fukushima, then you lose power to a massive amount of part of the country. So centralised generation is cheaper but inherently less robust. A decentralised generation is more expensive overall but tremendously more robust, and you're spreading the cost across your whole population so that each individual bears a lower cost, but the overall total cost is higher. So that begins, if you think about it, to start to approach this idea of is it worth it? Will it cost more? Well, aggregate, yes, it's going to cost more, but in terms of the individual, it's going to feel like it costs less. You're going to have to spend on the initial installation. There's a period of time that installation will run, and there's a period of saving that can possibly be made over that installation lifetime. Now, that may be more expensive than you're currently paying. If you go out there and buy everything brand new, top-of-the-line stuff, install your system and get it up and running, the chances are you're going to be paying more for your electricity. And if that's the decision that you want to make, then that's likely to be more expensive for you. But that doesn't really answer the question of is it worth it? It only answers the question of does it cost more? Is it worth it has a much broader scope than just the financial cost at the end of the day. There are a lot more things to consider on a question of is it worth it. It's universally understood, although of course we live in a world of 7 billion people, so there are always going to be people who have one view and people who have another, but generally it's universally understood that we're in a global economic crisis. We're in a crisis of power and we're in a crisis of the environment. Our main source of energy at the moment consists primarily of burning things. That's really what we do. And there's been a huge transition to stop doing that. Nuclear was one of those things. It's essentially a burning reaction, incidentally, but it is one of those things that we're attempting not to burn stuff, but it has a huge amount of associated problems as various accidents, beginning early, I suppose, at 3 Mile Island and including Chernobyl and Fukushima, has brought to light. Now, Japan has abandoned the nuclear industry totally, even though it was responsible for something like 75–80% of its generation capability. It's closed them all and gone another way. Everybody in the world is watching Japan, particularly with this decentralization idea, to see if it's actually a success. If that's a success, chances are that is going to be the model adopted worldwide. There are a number of reports available, and one of the reports actually covers what's called the defection rate in North America. The defection rate in North America is the rate at which people leave the grid and then go to their own generation where they're using something called combined heat and power. Combined heat and power actually is more efficient than just straightforward electrical generation. Let's have a think about how you generate your electrical energy. You essentially burn something and you create heat and electrical energy. If you just gather the electrical energy and use that, it's going to be more expensive. If you use the heat that you're also generating from things like gasifiers or even just ordinary gasoline engines where you're turning a generator, and you use that extra heat and use that to do things like warm your house and heat your water, actually that becomes cheaper. So when you're looking at combined systems, that's a much better answer than just electrical energy generation, because you can use two sources. And that gives you the idea that home power generation actually isn't just one thing that's going to answer your problem. It's actually a combined problem where you're looking at multiple systems. And if you look at multiple systems, then you're going to have a much more efficient and a much cheaper system than just looking at one. So home generation really requires you to have a bit more of a broader view. There isn't really a magic bullet, one solution that will answer all of these problems. I know it would be lovely. It would be lovely if we had a pill that you could take and all of your problems went away and you were perfectly healthy for the next 200 years. That would be just awesome. Unfortunately, of course, it doesn't exist. I mean, that doesn't stop people hoping for it. It doesn't stop people looking for it, but it doesn't exist. And it's the same thing with energy generation. It would be lovely if there was one solution that would answer all of these problems. But I hate to tell you this, there just isn't. You're going to have to look at putting together a system that has a combined solution if you want to do that. Now, another aspect of this, of course, is to do with that environmental aspect. I mean, currently, we're engaged in an activity of burning our future right now. I mean, to hell with the kids, let's fly our drone for an extra 15 minutes. That's the kind of mentality that I think is going on in some people's heads. I don't understand it, but I do think it's what's happening with some people. And we have to think about our kids and our future, otherwise humanity is done for. It's no good burning all that fuel until it's all gone and going boo-hoo. We have to look now at what those solutions might be. Now, there's an awful lot of readily available solutions that will make a difference. You don't make a difference by doing something suddenly all at once on a massive scale. You actually make a difference by doing something small. And the small thing that we can do is make small changes to our lives that will reduce the amount of energy that we actually consume. Looking at what it is that you actually do, having a strategy really, and working out a combined approach to this problem that we most definitely have is what I believe to be the solution to our energy and environmental needs. I think that that approach is really going to be what we need to do. Now, when we ask the question, is it worth it? Does having that combined approach mean that we're going to have a less detrimental impact on the environment? Well, I would say most definitely yes. So that is it worth it with the environmental issue would also bring in the yes answer. Is it worth it in terms of strict money if you go for a top-end system and only look at your electricity generation? It's highly likely to be no. If you look at all of the other issues that are concerned around this, well, you're looking at things like combined systems, environmental impact, the possibility of the future, then I would say it was a resounding yes. Is it worth it? Now, of course, it brings into mind that money is an important issue. We don't have a bottomless pockets. Well, I don't, and most people don't. Some people do, and that's awesome. Good luck to them. But I don't. So we have to make choices about what it is that we're going to do. If you have a lot of money, you have the dedication, and this is an important issue that you want to make a difference to, go right ahead, work out a strategy, combined system, and do something about it. If you're a bit more like me and you don't have that, you've got a few pennies and you still want to do something, you've got a couple of options, really. One of the options is to buy a smaller system that does part of the job, so at least you're making a difference. Another option, of course, is to build your own. Now, I'm very keen on building your own, as you know, and I'm keen on that because I think it adopts other environmental issues like waste. I mean, we live in a consumer society. We are driven to consume by everything around us. Advertising tells us to buy an apple, take one bite and throw it away and buy the next apple. That's what we're encouraged to do by the consumer society, because our economy, our jobs, our growth, it's all about consume, consume, consume. And of course that's in direct conflict with looking after the environment, and the issue isn't really one or the other, it's balancing the two, because we do need jobs, we do need money, we do need a healthy economy, and we do need to look after our environment, and so we have to balance the two. Now, I'm very keen at reuse, recycle, change, update, don't throw away, all that sort of stuff. That's what I'm very keen on. And so I look at different methods that we could possibly build ourselves. So I'm a great DIYer. I love to do these things, and I think we should have more responsibility for what we're doing and try to build things ourselves rather than buy things. But equally, that's a moderated approach. There are some things I wouldn't attempt to build because it just takes too long, and I want to have a system now. I don't want to have a system in 15 years' time when I've learnt to program. I want to do it now. So what I tend to do is recycle, reuse, repurpose what I can, but then if I don't have the equipment, the technical skill and know-how or the time, to buy a version in that will do the job that I just can't do. And of course there are lots of things that you can do. There are lots of generators you can make. There are lots of solar applications you can do where you can actually go out and do this stuff. It's one of the reasons there are so many videos, because there are so many things that we can do. Because when you're in a situation where there's so many things you can do, it's a bit like being in a candy store with lots of jars filled with very nice shiny sweets, and you've got your pocket money in your hand. You don't end up actually buying anything. You end up standing in the middle of the room, turning round and round and round, wondering which to buy. The truth is, it doesn't really matter that much. It only really matters that you do something. So if something strikes you as interesting, that's the thing that you should follow. Now, I do an awful lot of videos on lots of different things because we're all different people, and different things strike us as interesting. And it doesn't really matter what it is, it's to your individual bent of what you find interesting is what you're going to follow. So we do a lot of things where we're doing models of stuff to introduce ideas and possible ways of improving them to make our own home generation. But an awful lot of this stuff is actually readily available as well and can be put together from parts just on the shelf that would be brand new. And that's the kind of thing that I'm hoping to encourage, is that you look at something, you think it's interesting, you develop an idea, or you go out and find a version that's already for sale, or bits that you can put together to make that version that's already for sale. There's a really interesting idea, and there's a couple of videos coming up on it, called the liquid air battery. Now, there's a pilot plant running at the moment in the UK where what they do is they compress air to cryogenic temperatures and store it in a tank. Now, this compressor and storage are already built components. They store propane gas in it, for instance, and the pressures aren't that high that you need specialised containers. They just in off-the-shelf containers. What they then do is release that gas, heat it up a little bit and blow it over a turbine, and they are generating electricity which is net positive from compressed air, which is really very cool. It's a bit like pumped hydro, if you think about it. And they're calling it the liquid air battery because, of course, it's rechargeable. It's a cylinder full of air. When it's exhausted, they pump more compressed air into it, and so it's called the liquid air battery, which I just thought was absolutely fascinating. It's a very simple idea, and it's currently being pilot tested in, I think it was about a 50 million plant, and they're running this at the moment to see how that will do for energy generation. I think that's awesome. It's also something you could do quite easily at home. Get yourself an empty propane tank, a compressor, compress some air to liquid, either buy a turbine or build yourself a Tesla turbine, and bingo, you've got yourself a system where you can generate some air. Either you could completely DIY build that, or you could buy the components for that, or you could just have the thing ready-made for you. And that's the kind of thing that I'm actually on about and talking about when it comes to this stuff. Now, there, of course, we have a conception of, is it worth it? When you consider that you've decided you're going to do it, and then you look at the cost involved in it, there's also a cost in your time there. If you have the time and you want to do that, then that's a brilliant thing. Is it worth spending your time? I would say yes. If you don't think it's worth spending your time, you're going to spend your money. And if you spend the money and not the time, then it's just a balance between those two, really, to get yourself a system that's up and running. So what I'm trying to say here in this video is that the question, is it worth it, is a broader concept than just the cost involved. There are other things to consider. When it comes to an individual system, when you're considering whether that system is worth it or not, then it's really actually just to do with your own personal bent about what you feel is a good system and would fit in your circumstances for where you live. I mean, clearly, if you live in the Arctic and you put up a solar installation, you've probably made a mistake. If you live somewhere where there's never any wind and you put up a generator, you've probably made a mistake. It just won't turn, and so you'll never get any energy. So the question, is it worth it in a geographical location, just is talking about environmental factors. People live in different places, people have different ideas, and so there are lots and lots of options, and a particular option is going to be worth it because of your bent and your locality, not just because of the money you're going to spend on it. So is it worth it is a huge question, actually, and you can only really answer it for yourself. And a lot of it is going to be dependent on how you see the world, a lot of it is going to depend on what you want from things, and also where you are, how much money you've got, what kind of time you can dedicate to it, whether it's one system or a combined system that you're looking at, are all going to be issues that you're going to have to balance up when you answer that question, is it worth it? Now, a lot of people, of course, have already answered that question, me included. I think it's worth it. I think it's worth expending all of this effort to really, if you like, save our future. So anyway, I thought I would share those ideas with you because it's the basis of where you start, really, because you have to make that decision first. You have to decide that it is worth doing in a general sense before you start to look at the specific implications of it. That general sense that you're looking at has got much more to do with how you see the world than it has got to do with how much money you've got to spend on it. But I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it did spark some ideas and made you start thinking about some of these issues that you may not have thought about. I do understand an awful lot of people will already have thought about them, but thank you very much for watching.